Slaves didn't just build the Unitarian Church in Charleston, South Carolina. They also dug the clay to make the bricks that form the sanctuary walls. The sentence I began with was from an article in the UU World, our denominational magazine. It goes on to say, a memorial made from some of the church's original bricks honors those enslaved workers. The memorial was completed in April of 2013 in the churchyard of the historic building and was dedicated in a special service and community celebration. We have a picture of it that will be appearing soon. The 3-foot-high monument is a simple brick rectangle, 2 feet thick and 4 feet wide. Mounted on the front of it is a wrought iron sculpture of a bird looking over its back. The bird. The bird is a sankofa, a West African symbol from Ghana, meaning looking back in order to move forward. An inscription on the granite base of the monument reads, "In memory of the enslaved workers who made these bricks and helped build our church." Several years after that memorial was dedicated, I stood in that churchyard and read that inscription, and I was profoundly moved. I was moved by the courage and determination of the present-day Unitarian Universalists who decided not to ignore the truly ugly parts of their history. Instead, they paid attention to who they had been and acknowledged their complicity in a terrible evil. I was moved by the simple beauty of the memorial and especially by the eloquence of the wrought iron bird mounted to the bricks. Mostly, I was moved by knowing that I stood on ground that had been inhabited by enslaved persons whose blood, sweat, and tears soaked that very ground. Take off your shoes, I thought. The ground on which you stand is holy ground. Now, out of that story, and so many other stories, there are 3 important messages that I want to share with you this morning. The first is that language matters. A couple of years ago, I attended a lecture by Stephanie Ewell entitled The Shifting Lens of History, How We Reimagine the Past. I'm indebted to her for a number of the concepts in this sermon. She talked about how much language matters and used as an example the difference between referring to someone as a slave or an enslaved person. To say somebody is a slave is to reduce them to nothing but their exploited status. It is to dehumanize them, to other them. To say that somebody is an enslaved person is to restore their humanity, to give them agency, and to acknowledge that there is a system that exploits some for the benefit of others. An enslaved person is exploited by an enslaver, not a slaveholder, which speaks, she said, in a passive voice and glides over the ugly power dynamics of the practice of chattel slavery. An enslaver actively participates in that exploitation. So language matters. The second point I want to make is that symbols matter. Dr. Ewell pointed in her lecture to the fact that symbols are not value neutral. They carry messages from the culture, and they are used to shape the ongoing evolution of that culture. The Sankofa, that bird, has its origins in the Akan people of Ghana in West Africa. The image of the bird is a powerful symbol that, while it may have originated with one people in Africa, has been adopted by people of African descent around the world who struggle to hold on to a brutally suppressed history and culture. Sankofa is often associated with a proverb which translates as, "It is not wrong to go back for that which you have forgotten." The Sankofa bird has been adopted as an important symbol in African American and African diaspora contexts to represent the need to reflect on the past to build a successful future. Symbols matter. They can empower or disempower. Why do you think rainbow flags are routinely stolen or set on fire or sliced to pieces? Can a rainbow flag outside a church or a home really hurt people who pass by? Of course not. But a rainbow flag is more than a flag. It is a statement of values and intentions. It is countercultural. It says we dissent from the accepted practices of injustice that the dominant culture has defined as normal. A rainbow flag suggests that the definition of normal could be expanded to include a whole variety, a whole cacophony of expressions of sexuality and identity. For some, that is something to embrace and celebrate. For others, it is a challenge to their understanding of human nature. There is still work to do in challenging the previously unquestioned assumptions of binary gender, human love, and intimacy. And speaking of vandalizing symbols, in Wilmington, where I served as a developmental minister, our Black Lives Matter banner was vandalized multiple times after we put it up. Every time we would order another one and put it back up, and the only reason the vandalism stopped is that a determined group from the church figured out how to hang it so high that the spineless vandals who did their dirty work in the dark of night couldn't figure out how to get up there. The most interesting and ironic result of all that vandalism is that we got much more publicity when we replaced the vandalized banners than we got when we first put the first one up. And we got much more community support in the aftermath of the vandalism than we had initially. I had several conversations with well-meaning people who said the classic, but don't all lives matter? Sure, I would say. What were you doing to make sure all lives mattered before we put up that banner? Well, how about the Confederate flag, since we're talking about symbols? How do you feel when you drive by a home or a pickup truck and see that flag flying? Are you threatened, disgusted, curious? Symbols matter. When challenged about their Confederate flags or the monuments to Confederate heroes, the response we often hear is, it's not about hatred, it's about heritage. And that brings me to the third and most important point of this sermon, and that is the difference between heritage and history. Note that we are calling the transition exercise that will unfold over the next few months honoring our shared history, not honoring our shared heritage. And what is the distinction that I'm trying to make here? Dr. Ewell explained the difference so well, I'm going to paraphrase her here. History, she said, as a discipline, assumes that the human story has multiple perspectives. Historians believe it is critically important to tell the whole story. That is, the story that accounts for all the diverse perspectives and experiences. Not just the winners, not just the majority, not just those whose experience have been normed so that their piece of the story seems like the whole story. The danger of telling a simple single-strand story is that it leaves out much of the reality of how things came to be the way they are. Dr. Ewell uses the phrase flattening history to describe this phenomenon. In a flattened or sanitized history, there is no cacophony, there's no messiness, there's also no creativity. Flattened history is not actually history. It's heritage, defined as a set of inherited traditions or beliefs about how it is with us. It's the we've always done it this way. Heritage is not communicated through scholarship, but through particular objects that are treasured or even revered. There are group values attached to these objects, and ideas, make no mistake about that. You can object all you want that the Confederate flag is not about white supremacy, but I'm not buying it. And neither are the people waving those flags. They know what values are attached to it, and so do we. Heritage is the result of allowing a single group, the winners, to tell their story and claim it as the whole story. Now, here's where the paying attention part comes in. When you pay careful attention to what is bequeathed you, one of the questions you must ask is, whose voices are missing from this story? Who got written out? Who has become invisible? Who has been dismissed as a troublemaker or a thug? Could they, in fact, be the justice makers instead? How many of you have heard somebody say something along the lines of, well, if there's going to be a course in women's history, we should have a course in men's history too. It's only fair. Any of you ever hear that? You know what our response could be, don't you? There's always been a course in men's history. We just called it history. Right. More frequently today, we have people claiming that if there's going to be a black history course, there should be a white history course too. Yeah, we've always had that one too. And you know what we called it? History. Most recently, and I think this is really interesting, I've heard pleas in several places that if we're going to have a gay pride parade, we should have a straight pride parade too. Now, I grew up in New York City where there were parades on Fifth Avenue all the time. St. Patrick's Day Parade, the Kosciuszko Day Parade, the Easter Parade. They were all straight pride parades. We just called them parades. When one group, the dominant group, gets to have their experiences and memories and cultural heritage, their particular story, stand in for the whole story, then injustice flourishes and diversity begins to die. When one group, the dominant group, has their experiences normed, then members of all the other groups get othered out of the conversation. Remember that proverb associated with Sankofa. It is not wrong to go back for that which you have forgotten. In truth, it is essential to go back for that which we have forgotten or left out if we are to create a congregation, a community, a nation that truly reflects the full range of our values and experiences. Think about the Thanksgiving story. Whose story is it? Think about what people my age learned in school about Christopher Columbus. Whose story was that? Think about the current battle over what people call critical race theory. Look at the list of books that are banned by school boards all over the country. What is the purpose of public education? Is it to flatten history, or is it to study history? Dr. Ewell used an intriguing phrase when she talked about how a group of people could use the discipline of history, that is, the critical analysis of all the evidence, hearing all the voices, incorporating all the experiences. She called it the creation of a messy, imaginative aftermath. I love that. This messy, imaginative aftermath could be the basis for a more just, more free, more inclusive, more welcoming society. And that is exactly what we are trying to do with our Honoring Our Shared History project. When I say we, I mean me and the transition team and others in leadership. We are trying to avoid passing on a heritage that is a sanitized, flattened version of the past created by a single group. We are trying instead to create an open and inclusive process that gives equal value to all experiences and perspectives. We want all of you to contribute to the narrative about how the Unitarian Universalists of Clearwater came to be what it is today. We want the story to be filled with ambiguity and the kind of messiness that multiple perspectives always create. We are planning to put together panels of members who first came to this congregation in each decade, starting with the 70s. Panels of people who have served on search committees and committees on ministry. And who else would you like to hear from? I welcome your ideas for other people and groups we could add to this oral history project. Join me in the social hall at noon. We'll have a little sermon conversation and we can talk about that. Why are we doing this? Well, if you because as a professional transition minister, I believe with all my heart and all of my experience that the West African proverb is true. It is not wrong to go back for that which you have forgotten, or that to which you have paid insufficient attention. Just as we as a nation have had to reframe our understanding of the origins of Thanksgiving once we paid enough attention to allow the whole story to be told, so it is with congregational history. Some of that story may be painful to acknowledge, as it was for the UUs in South Carolina. There may have been times when you didn't hear all the voices, when perspectives were privileged at the cost of others being dismissed. All I know is that we have, among us and between us, the courage to go back for that which we have forgotten. It's the right thing to do, and the fruit of that work will be a gloriously messy and imaginative aftermath. A cacophony that answers fully those essential transition questions. Who were we? Who are we? How did we get from here to there? And when you have achieved that clarity, you will be ready to answer that final question: who do we hope to be? As the poet Rita Dove said, if you don't look back, the future never happens. It is not wrong to go back for that which you have forgotten. If you don't look back, the future never happens. So let's invite that future to start happening. We'll begin the conversation at noon today for those of you who want to stay. As promised, I will repeat that conversation on Zoom on Tuesday evening. And then over the next couple months, look for word from our transition team members about the oral history panels that we're putting together.